numbers. Greg will chime in on how cybercrime actually works behind the scenes. Who actually is trying to hack you? That's the scare the pants off you part. How do you get hacked? We'll talk specifically about how companies, firms get hacked, what the entry points are. Give you a rundown on some real claims we've experienced for law firms, and then talk a bit about the solutions. So it's not like we can't do anything about it. There's lots of very easy and accessible ways to solve the problem for some of these risks. And then just run you through the claim process if you ever have a claim, because you have coverage automatically through your law society. There's a few things you need to do in order to make sure that you preserve your coverage. So we'll give you a rundown on what those things are. And by the time you get to that place, you'll think, I really need to do those things anyways. So none of those will seem outsized. And if you have any questions, we'll be able to answer practical solutions. So at the end, we'll try and leave some space for questions. So a bit about Greg and I. As mentioned, I'm the CIO and principal broker for Alternative Risk Services. Not a household name because we're not a traditional insurance broker. We're predominantly actuaries and consultants, and we've been working with the Canadian Lawyers Insurance Association, or CLIA, for your E&O since its inception in one form or another. One of our staff has been working on the CLIA program since, I think, 1980s. And so we continue to do consulting and strategic work. We used to run the whole program before they established their own office and CEO in Regina. So we've been working with this group for a long time. And actually, we're part of the team that started to develop cyber solutions for the CLIA firms. Greg, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I got the good fortune of meeting Ryan about 8-9 years ago. And we've been working on the lawyer's side of the cyber business ever since. But we started, I'm one of the original founding shareholders of Ridge Canada. We're a managing general agency, which is a fancy insurance way of saying we build product, build raters, and then get insurance companies to back said items, and we underwrite in-house. And so we've built out insurance products, but we've specialized in cyber insurance. So we built all our own scanning technology. We've built all of our own incident response and remediation tools. And we've partnered with Lloyd's of London and domestic carriers to become one of the top 10 Canadian portfolios of cyber insurance in the country, but it's Canadian.
Yeah. So working with Greg, we customized the standalone insurance program. If anybody's gone through that application process, it's about 13 check boxes. At the time we built that for CLIA, it used to be 13 pages. And so we whittled it down to make it more and more accessible. And we continue to refine that process as we go along. So that's our sort of history and where we're coming from with our presentation. So what is cyber risk? It really is losses and attacks related to these 4 items: personal data, business data, systems, and functionally money. It's really all about money at the end of the day. But we'll run through each one of those just to give you a flavor for the things that hackers are after. So personal data is essentially your personally identifiable information. Anything beyond, just first name, last name, where it could cause reasonable risk of real harm. And there's actually a test for it. Greg, do you want to talk a bit about the test? Because you've been involved in this a long time.
So the test in Canada, we were the first country globally to actually have federally mandated notification requirements come out. That was November 1, 2018, and we introduced the real risk of significant harm. So if an organization is impacted, the data that they store, in order to trigger that reporting requirement to everybody that's been affected or impacted, as if it passes the Roche test. Typically, the Roche test is if there's financial information, if there's anything to do that would be detrimental to a person's safety or well-being, it triggers that test. I know we're getting into PHI, so that'll be different, but on the PII side, typically what we've seen from a legal perspective is if there is systems access to certain areas where cases or anything else that data is stored, it's going to trigger the Roche Roche test anyway, not just on, plus the financial implications.
So a good measure or a rough justice calculation, because I think no firm can probably figure out exactly how many data points they have stored. But think about it, number of client files at least times two is probably a good rough justice way. Is always an opposing party. You probably have information about them. So usually that's the advice we give when firms are thinking, how do I calculate my PII count? Typically that's the rough justice route we go with to figure that out. But essentially that data, they're after that, and they're after that to monetize it by taking that information and spilling it out all over the dark web, where it then has a monetary value. And the more data you have and the more it could be exploited, the higher the value. So I think there's a cost per record kind of approach that the criminals take.
Yeah, there is, especially, and we've seen those costs vary year over year, depending on what the flavor du jour is amongst the hacking community. Because right now, if it's just straight individual records, there are billions of them that are readily available on the dark web. So when you get into things that are a little bit more targeted, if you get into a lot of the times, we're not dealing with espionage related hacks, but we're dealing with disruptive related hacks. And so case files, we found when you can't operate your business and there is that impact to your client base in a ransomware scenario, which we're going to get into, those tend to be of higher value for sale on the dark web. So it goes up and it goes down, but
so personal data is basically traded like a commodity on the dark web.
Correct.
Next slide. So business data, but the other side of it, where you can exploit or interject yourself into transactions. Third-party claims would usually be what comes out of this, whereby one of your clients, for example, their information in part of a transaction or a personal file gets bled out to the other side. They lose their competitive advantage that can run into a third-party claim. Frankly, you don't see a lot of third-party claims. I think it's maybe 2 or 3% of global cyber claims.
Yeah, in Canada, it's even less than that right now. We haven't updated PIPEDA in quite some time, and then Bill C-26, which applied to critical infrastructure, died on the vine when Parliament was prorogued in January. So we were hoping that would catch us up to some of the global legislative frameworks that we see, like the European Union, some of the state by state in the US, but we're not quite there. And yeah, we're just not as litigious as they are in the US. So we've seen some class actions come out of this, but it's typically with larger cases. So a lot, to Ryan's point, most, like if not, well, all of our CLIA losses that we've written on the legal side of things in years has all been first party and not third party. And there's one example that's in particular that's very Canadian and one that I always love. We sort of did ourselves a disservice in the class action when Tim Hortons was involved, because everybody that was impacted by the Tim Hortons breach and the class action lawsuit against it did receive some form of compensation, but it was a coffee and a donut. So the precedent that we set on our own data sets was a little bit not the strongest.
So caffeination and a yummy treat, and I'm good to go, no problem.
Yeah.
But that's essentially that third party piece is something that most, in my experience, as we've been doing this since about 2016 for CLIA, on the third party is what lawyers and law firms have been most concerned about and has the least impact. And in fact, it's the first party side, which is why things have morphed over the years to include first party coverage. And we've expanded that with Greg's help. So
yeah, even the DLA Piper incident back in 2015, I think, it didn't really result in any third party litigation. So we've been relatively insulated from it. The reputational damage side obviously has a major impact on things, and the biggest one was Fonsac Fonseca of the Panama Papers back when too. So
I felt really bad for all those people. Next slide. So systems are the other piece. getting into your systems and stopping you from being able to work and build and provide service to your clients is one of their core goals, because what they'll do is they'll leverage that for extortion. And that's actually evolved over time. It used to be to go in and just lock up your PCs. You can't log into them. You just get a little screen telling you to call the help desk to unlock your computer, pay a big ransom, and then they unlock your PC. For the most part, unlock your systems. Now that's evolved, and what they're looking to do is exfiltrate that data, make sure they have it in their own hands, and then they'll ransom you for the to get your data deleted. And they do a whole fancy process of making a show of showing you it was deleted and so on. And there's a whole proof of like process. But getting access to your systems is another piece. Regardless of the level of success, even if they're not successful at all, it's massively disruptive to have this kind of thing happen. So backups are key. We'll talk a lot about the kinds of things that we can put in place to prevent stuff or avoid having to pay ransom or minimize costs. But if you have one of these events, you're going to have to go through a process to clear your systems, correct things, and so on. So it will be disruptive no matter what you do, even if you don't get successfully ransomed. Next slide. At the end of the day, all of the previous things are all about making money. So it's ransom, it's disruption, it's stealing private data, credit card information, etc. The most direct route, as Greg told me yesterday, is these direct money acquisition scams and frauds. So social engineering fraud, which is not part of the mandatory program, is all about the hacking of people, just duping somebody in the accounting process into changing the direction of money so that client funds or firm funds go somewhere they're not supposed to a criminal's address. They're often called Friday frauds because they will leverage the heat of the moment and the urgency. It's Friday, it's 4 p.m., it's Christmas Eve, you name it, they'll use it to try and get you to overlook some of your controls that you should have in place in order to transfer funds to the wrong place. And this happens fairly regularly. It's getting very hard to cover it because it happens so often. So insurance for it is quite expensive, but it's a great coverage if you can get it. Computer fraud is very similar, except that it involves getting into the computer systems and then using that as the way to extricate funds. So hacking your email and then getting into the email and then hacking your bank accounts, which is why we'll talk about how bank access is such a critical control. Telecommunication frauds, I always have a little chuckle about this one because really it used to be when I was little, you paid 10 cents a minute to call long distance and that had value. But technically it's a coverage on some cyber policies. Telecommunication fraud seems to be going the way of the dodo, but essentially they're using your phone system to exfiltrate money by basically getting you to pay for the long distance fees or call 1-800 numbers, whatever else it is.
That came into the cyber realm when what media conglomerate was hacked in the UK, and then they were basically extorted by the threat actors for some information that had been left on voicemails. So the cyber policy can pick that up outside of crime because it's unauthorized access, which is your typical trigger on these policies. But yeah, it's there. On your traditional crime coverage, you have telecommunications fraud, and then you've got facsimile fraud too. So the insurance policy language is not exactly keeping up to complete date.
The last one, which has the coolest name by far, and it's the least interesting when you actually look at what it is. It's called cryptojacking. Sounds particularly futuristic, but really it's just somebody getting access to your systems and using it to mine cryptocurrency using your system. And when you use your systems to mine cryptocurrency, it's massively energy intensive. Your systems will spin up, they'll be running a full tilt. They cost a lot of money in power consumption. So it's really just the coverage of your hydro bill. But shouldn't be downplayed because it can be a lot if you have a large server.
Yeah, and potentially the interruption costs if it goes on for a long time and your productivity wanes as a result because your computer can't process different things, and the little hourglass clock just keeps flipping on things. But it's few and far between. To Ryan's point, it's typically the hydro costs. As Ryan mentioned, the social engineering fraud, that is the fastest monetization strategy that we're seeing the criminal gangs really deploy. It's the equivalent of smash and grab. They can go in, dupe someone, look at the email, or fake someone's email and just have funds transferred out. We're seeing this be a particular consequence in the legal space for anyone that does real estate law, because your transactions are just of a certain consequence, like they're much higher. And because real estate is moving all the time, there's a lot of it. And so the threat actors are zeroing in on people that practice within real estate. Because one of those hits and there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that are transferred out right away. Ransomware is the second fastest monetization strategy. And put that into context, it used to be that you could get in and get out in about 2-3 weeks. Now it's more prolonged. You're looking at extended downtime. You're looking at extended complexity of the restoration process. And if you're lucky, you can get out in 2 to 3 weeks still, and your systems can be back up and running. Systems can be back up and running to the point where you're still able to bill and do all of these things in a week, 2 weeks, but it's still entirely disruptive. And then recovery from that. And there's no guaranteed success from a threat actor when they're extorting you. So that's why it's the second fastest monetization strategy, even though it is the highest impact, which we touch upon.
It's great. And so quick segue into the fact that cybercrime is actually a business. And I was super interested when Greg was telling stories, and I'll let him do that, about how the threat actors actually work. I feel like it's got to be some 16-year-old kid in a hoodie drinking Mountain Dew in his basement. And Greg will tell us how that's actually not the case.
Except for the
Yeah,
last
that's
one.
right.
The latest arrest that the FBI actually made was a 19-year-old kid. But we'll see. We focus on small business, and in the early days of Ridge Canada, a lot of the pushback that we would get is we don't have anything that anyone would want. We're too small. We don't have any sensitive data. And the reality is, all small businesses do have access to funds. Not all, but most have access to funds, which makes us in Canada a target overall. And when you look at sure, maybe you're not a target to the APT groups coming out of China, the advanced persistent threats that are tied to the Chinese government and for reconnaissance and espionage and things like that. But what we've seen is the evolution of the ransomware as a service and ransomware gangs in particular. So these groups are run as organized crime. Like it is very organized. There's an emphasis on that organization. They are coordinated, and the way that I break it down, I try and liken it and tell the story and paint the picture is it's kind of like the insurance community. So
I did not want to make that parallel. Go ahead, Greg.
So the insurance up top are the equivalent of the people that develop the code, the ransomware code itself. And then you've got brokers or access control brokers who are the people that are doing the hacking. So the people that have the code, you'll hear weird names like Akira or Scattered Spider, or like all of these weird names that are out there. Those are the actual developers that put the code together. And as Ryan mentioned, the evolution of that code has gone into way different variations since the original ransomware scourge. But crypto has only been around since 2011. And so with the advent of crypto, that obviously started to take things off. And the anonymity that comes with it has been a challenge for attribution from a law enforcement standpoint. So that's what started the massive growth in these companies, because they are run as a company. So the access control brokers are the ones that are hacking everything. And a lot of them are shotgun approach. They're just spraying and praying that they get something, and they're going to get something. And it's just a matter of they put you on a list, and then they bring you, if they're able to get into your systems, then they bring you your risk to the insurance company. The insurance company says, you know what, this looks like a good opportunity. We'll pay you 80% of the commissions that you get, but we're keeping 20. And that is how it works. And then you look at the groups themselves, and they are incredibly sophisticated. They have marketing teams, so they have recruitment teams, they've got human resources, they've got call center squads, they've got everything. And in the jurisdictions in which those big ones are operating, they act with relative impunity. Now there has and it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole for law enforcement. So you whack one mole and then they just spin up their servers and in a different jurisdiction and start up again. But ultimately, it's big business. In Canada alone, we're losing billions of dollars a year to ransomware gangs, and like globally, it's huge. So we've had situations. Just to tell you how they're running it as a business, they have customer service teams. So we've had situations where we're slow playing the actual extortion negotiation, and the client will get a call because they know who the client is. So they'll get a call and they'll get through, and they'll actually say, "Hey, we noticed that you haven't been communicating through the dark web channels. Are you having trouble procuring crypto to pay us? If you need help, we have some crypto brokers and we have access to cryptocurrency that we can help with." I've had situations post loss where this is years back, and again, years back, this isn't just current, years back, where we had to pay a small ransom. And after that happened, the client was sent a survey on what their experience was like. Like they're running it like a business, and it's. I wish I was joking, but they're organized and they're good at it. So it's pretty wild. It is a bit of the wild, wild west right now.
So what I wanted to add to that is that it all starts with lead generation, as Greg said. The brokers are out there spraying and praying, and that's why oftentimes if you buy a cyber policy, if you go with the standalone program, which we'll talk about later, this is not a sales pitch in any way, shape, or form. But if you do that, you may get scanned. You may not know you get scanned by Greg and his team unless your score is not high enough. Essentially, they're walking around. I like to use another analogy. Your cyber systems are like a house. And what they do is they walk around the perimeter. They don't go inside, and they just look and see, okay, there's a ladder on the back porch. That's a no-no. Windows are open. Clearly, there's no security system going on here. And the criminals do the exact same thing. So it's sort of a white hat approach to see whether you have open doors that they can just walk through and start taking stuff. Because if we know about it, then the criminals know. And so that would be their first form of lead generation. If they see that there's open ports, they may then walk their software in the front door, install it, and then lay in wait, and then bring you as a potential client up to their bosses. So it's lead generation, identifying the best clients, executing the service, and then getting paid. And the reality is they actually work mostly with honor, because they know if they don't pay, if they don't clean your systems up and leave you in relatively good order after getting paid, then they know nobody will pay. And so they actually reinforce that quite heavily. That's why service is important to them.
Yeah, the honor amongst thieves component was particularly concerning in the early days when you didn't have the access control brokers, because then it was just some of the gangs going directly after clients. And that's why you were seeing some of the bigger extortion amounts, and they were big game hunting, so to speak, on Fortune 100 and things like that. Now with the access control brokers operate, like they're bringing all of these opportunities in, and it's it's how can we actually get to all of them. And so some of them, if you patch your systems, you can get off of that list. But the real thing, to Ryan's point, is the access control brokers need to act with a little bit of honor to the folks that are lending them the code, because their code base is what actually makes them money. And if the people that create the code find out that one particular gang affiliate isn't giving back anything, then it reflects more poorly on the folks at the top, and then they won't give them access to their code anymore. So you see access control brokers really getting pushed out of the industry if they're not doing what they say they'll do, which is delete the data, but after giving back the decryption keys.
So it's one of the common questions, like why ever pay a ransom? The reality is it can be very effective. It can also be a tool if there was ever a third party loss. where you got sued by a client. If you didn't pay the ransom, did you really do all that you could do to protect their data? So there's lots of reasons why you would pay the ransom. The other piece to that is you might not be allowed if they're on the wrong list. So it's getting complicated.
Yeah, our sanctions list hasn't been updated to the same extent that the Office of Foreign Asset Control or the OFAC list has. OFAC updates with a lot of the access control brokers and the actual ransomware variants themselves. And so they get updated much quicker. And in order to pay a ransom to a known crypto wallet, because that's what happens is when you're going through a ransomware event, the forensics folks will come in and they'll do research on that crypto address, on the crypto wallet address for what's going on the OFAC side. If you wanted to pay that on in the US, you would have to alert the FBI, apply into OFAC, and go through all of these processes in order to actually justify being able to pay it out if it's a known entity on the OFAC sanctions exclusion list, because otherwise it's criminal. And
this is one of the great reasons why insurance, which gives you access to people who do this all day long and process ransomware events, is so critical because they have that unique knowledge.
Yeah,
we have so many sweet, cool slides coming up, so I don't sit on this one for too much longer. So how is it that you do get hacked? There's a whole bunch of attack vectors, as the industry would call them, weak spots used by criminals to get in. And there's a whole bunch of different names for them: firewall, endpoint, remote access, unpatched systems, open ports, remote desktop. And especially people are your weakest point because people make mistakes. So start a couple of those. For this presentation, we really tried to put together a map of what does all this stuff mean so you can take it away, print it, talk to your IT folks, get them to take the same kind of map approach, and you can see where all the data points is. So what we did was we put together a map of a typical firm's systems. It may not be your exact layout, but it will have most of the same structure. And it's always surprising just how much internet has impacted our way of doing business. So next slide. So put together this firm system map here, and you've got now, thanks to COVID predominantly, you've got all sorts of users operating out here with their mobile endpoints. That's the EPs, the laptops, their phones. You got your banks out here outside of the system, and your email is often with Microsoft 365 or some other provider, your telco, whatever the case is. But all that operates on the internet, outside of your firm's internal fortress, if you will, and that's protected by a firewall. And the firewall is the first point of protection, which basically allows certain things to come into your network or not. Then you have your router, which distributes the information inside your system. Your servers, which will host your client files, your data. You can have a number of different servers depending on how you're structured. Those servers, that client operational data will likely be backed up to a backup, which could be inside, could also be outside. Like I said, this is just one example. And then you have endpoints. I put an old tiny desktop computer just to shake things up. But you might have computers inside the office that never ever leave, in which case they're slightly different than the laptop that can travel in and out of your system. You may have applications like your billing software and things like that all inside, but and then you have firm staff, but it's all connected. Ultimately, there can be ways to move from outside of the system inside the system, and that's why cybersecurity has become such a big deal, even at the smallest firm level. Even if you're just a single sole proprietor, you probably have systems like this where you can access your email online, or you can access it from your phone or your laptop. Next, just push it once. And the reality is that the hackers sit outside on the internet. See, he's red because he's bad. It's not highbrow stuff here. It's just basically the basics. So, but all they have to do is sit on the internet and they can get access to everything if it's not secured. So next slide. That's just saying what I just said. So all these different attack vectors, and again, this is a nice way to visualize where all these attack vectors might sit. Social engineering fraud is typically the people, it's a phone call, and I think Greg was saying,
Faked emails backed up with phone calls. Yeah.
yeah, and they can essentially get people to execute changes in invoices, transfer requests, and so on. Lost devices are a real concern. We'll talk about how you fix all of these things, just so you know. So, computer fraud is a big deal for banks. That's why your online bank access is important. To secure business email compromise is one of the top risks. Getting into your email, getting access to all your contacts, all those emails, has gotten so prevalent that some of the vendors, the forensics vendors, have package pricing per mailbox. So it makes it easier for you to pay and get those mailboxes assessed by AI to see what kind of data might trigger a required report.
And having the email out there is a perfect, because you can also put it in here, like right on endpoint, just because the access to email external to the firm, everybody can typically get on an email from your browser, right? That is the one vector that all the time gets forgotten about. Everybody focuses on email protection
Outlook
here.
on their laptop.
Yeah, Outlook on your laptop and everything. But if you're in a pinch and you're remote and you need to check an email and you just log into someone's system and you verify your identity like on your phone, if you don't have to verify your identity, like that's the challenge, because those are the emails that oftentimes get overlooked by security teams and IT teams when you set it up. So you don't see as much of an issue here, definitely over there though.
The fact that it exists on the internet and is accessible on the internet. And actually just a couple days ago, massive global attack on SharePoint servers. If they're here inside your network and you're running SharePoint that's accessible to the internet, there's a weak point there.
Yeah.
And it has to be patched. And Microsoft didn't even have a patch for it. So they're working their way through it. So that's today. Yesterday I had to deal with an email on that to see whether we had any of those exposures, and we don't. Greg, we don't. Greg is also my insurer, just so you know. So ransomware, data exfiltration from your servers, distributed denial of service. Your router can be taken over and become a soldier in an attack on another entity, which is kind of amazing. And then phishing emails. We've seen all those. They look really janky. They're getting better and better and better because the criminals realize they can use ChatGPT to make really compelling mistake-free emails. So it's getting even harder for us to detect phishing. So we'll talk about all the tools and tricks that you can use to secure all this stuff. But I thought maybe this would be a great way to display where are these attacks, why they matter to me, where will they hit my systems. And this is a very typical setup for a company.
Yeah.
Next slide. So some real claims. I'm going to turn it over to Greg because Greg handles claims all day long. Thankfully, I only have to deal with them at the surface level for the most part. So Greg, you want to run through a few scenarios for us?
Yeah, on the ransomware side, the real impact claims that we've seen across law firms and across the program that we've run in all of the different provinces for the law societies that we're fortunate enough to work with, the ransomware undoubtedly has been the biggest impactor of issues. So we've seen a number of different losses where it's gone to the full $100,000 limit, and that wasn't even enough, like not nearly enough. Small, mid-sized, large law firms, it doesn't matter. It's indiscriminate. It's the spray and pray approach that's really happening, and getting in and seeing whether they can be successful. But to Ryan's point from the previous slide, we've seen everything from a lot of business email compromise. So people get duped to click on a link that opens up what looks to be or they'll hide behind something saying like, hey, it's time to update your Microsoft password. And you'll get that. But if you look at the email address that it's coming from, it's definitely not from Microsoft, it's from someone's Gmail. A lot of folks get that on their phones. So then they put their passwords into their phones. But from there, what happens is as soon as you start putting your password in, as soon as you click the link, there's what's called info stealers that get deployed. And so what they do is they basically route back your keystroking on what you're putting in, trigger it back so that they can get your password out of the gate. And then there's different ways of, if you don't have the multi-factor authentication component, which we'll touch upon, they basically have access keys to the kingdom right out of the gate. Now, on a lot of the ransomware cases, they are actually breaking in. So that's the first step. And then they'll try and socially engineer right out of the gate, because again, it's faster. So we've seen cases where they fail at the social engineering fraud, so they actually just deploy the ransomware at that point and lock everything down, and then they try on that side. We've had that happen on the last two or three situations where it was a failed social engineering attempt through business email compromise first, which led into a ransomware deployment, and then you're in the fun. But the ransomware side is very disruptive. The we've seen challenges because they are patient. Like as quick as they want to monetize, they do want efficacy as well. So they'll sit there and they'll try and figure out where they are within a system, because when they pop up into someone's email, they don't know who they have access to or what they have access to. And if they're not caught, then they'll just case the systems and they'll look at, okay, how do I get in? Can I get in? Is this firm running on OneDrive? Do I go through OneDrive? Can I get access into the admin function? Are there, not to nerd out too hard, but do we have access to the distribution base where the IT manager controls that, and so like access control into the systems? And then when they know that they've got a firm in a position of vulnerability, that's when they deploy.
And to that effect, they sometimes disable backups and then wait several months in order to improve their ability. Because first thing you do when you get ransomware is start looking at your backups, check out your backups. So the example thrown up here is a real live claim that was handled early on in the mandatory program. It was a small firm, 4 lawyers. They had ransomware deployed on their system, could not work. No problem. We have backups. They went to go to their backups. For sure, the backups were there. The backups were there.
Yeah.
But somebody lost the password to the backups. And so they couldn't restore their backups and therefore couldn't get back up and running. And so they lost months of business time, which ultimately is revenues, which meant that things got pretty good. That's genuinely a circumstance that we've had to deal with on the program. So they're not looking necessarily only at large firms, they're looking at small firms.
They're looking more at small and mid-sized firms than they are at looking at the large cap firms. Because it tends to be lower payouts but faster monetization, because they exert the same effort, but the potential to detect. In Canada, we have some of the highest detection and escalation costs in the world. And what that means is the threat actors, when they get in, they have more time before we are able to identify them and catch them. And so there's a litany of different exposure bases within ransomware claims that we've seen coming out. But most of the time, it's firms that are 10 lawyers or less that we're seeing having the most impacted by it.
Just a quick question, sorry. In this case scenario with the 4-lawyer firm, do you know how the ransomware came to be? Like, was it somebody clicking a link? Was it
it was
through their server? Like, what was that?
It was a link that wasn't supposed to be open, but we've seen them come in from not as frequently on when there's the standalone coverage, because we're scanning, but we have seen them in the past where it's unpatched. It's an unpatched VPN. So access into that, or an open port that just wasn't known about. There have been in the past the on-premises Microsoft Exchange server vulnerabilities. That from 5 years ago was a pretty big one. We saw some claims coming out of that. After that, we started to see most companies migrate away from having your email server in-house, and everybody's moving to the cloud now. But that was a big one from a vulnerability standpoint. But the most common is someone clicking something that they shouldn't.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Business email compromise. I think Greg's talked a bit about this being sort of a first entry point. But the key thing to note is the level of forensics work that needs to go in and the disruption you have. And fundamentally, we see fraudulent invoices go out to clients. And the worst thing about it as a company, especially as a lawyer or a law firm, is the embarrassment of having to send emails out to clients and say, hey, I've been hacked. Ignore everything you get from me that looks like a bill. And it's just, I think there's a lot of reputation damage that comes from that. So even if it doesn't go past the business email compromise, but you also have to filter through all of those emails that could have been sent to see what might be in there, and then work with counsel to figure out whether or not you have reporting requirements. So it becomes expensive anyways, but they're almost de rigueur now, right? $50,000 give or take to.
It's pretty close. The challenge is, while we've seen reduction in some of the costs from the third-party vendors that come in and help from the forensics folks in the form of, as Ryan mentioned before, set retainer fees. So $7,500 to do 3 email inboxes, and then 10 grand to do 20, sort of thing. Like there are fixed costs. But to Ryan's point, for law firms, the challenge is, depending on what got in, then there's potentially discovery components that get layered in, and that requires people. Now, AI is helping with that, but at the same time, it's making people more efficient and getting through what could be deemed sensitive. So, it's one thing to just set the filter on that discovery component to a 16-digit numeric thing to see, do we have credit card information in there, right? But there's a totally different element when it comes to some of the business related data or the sensitive firm related data that could come into play, that may not just trigger the Roche side of things, but also lead to the embarrassment factor or the reputational implications that Ryan mentioned.
And on the privacy side, and the privacy acts are going to be changing, sweeping through Canada. Ontario's already seen it. Quebec started the role. They're done. But essentially that privacy requirement, especially around data retention policies and having a great data retention policy, you can't say, I just keep everything forever. And one of these claims that we had where they accessed the data, they had every record they'd ever had back into the 80s on their servers actively back. There's no way you were still accessing that information. So it went all the way back into the past, which just meant so many more records and people were impacted.
Yeah. And with small firms, like even mid firms and large firms, the reality is, in Canada, we haven't really seen people do their own data mining exercises or their data mapping exercises, whether that's law firms, whether that's manufacturers, whether that's financial institutions. So there's so many different elements of data. So for example, tax data, you got to keep on hand for 7 years at least. If you're a school or an education, you got to keep that forever, right? And then we had the Power School incident that just happened. And so a lot in Toronto, the Toronto School Board is now notifying people that went there in the 90s, went to elementary school in the 90s and back into the 80s, because their records are still on file from that Power School software. So there's a whole lot of implications all the way across. Thanks.
Last but not least, this one's fairly quick, is the social engineering fraud aspect. This is a real claim that I had the pleasure of being involved in, whereby a firm transferred more than $2 million to a fraudulent account. It was literally, as I mentioned, it was the holidays, December 31st. Email that the transaction was coming to a close. Things were urgent. Somebody changed just one letter in the email address and sent it through. Just because of the nature of the transaction and the urgency in the holidays, they did do a callback procedure, but they did it within the number inside the fraudulent email. Just a simple mistake, and millions of dollars were gone. And before they could catch it, most of the money was scooped. So the social engineering fraud aspect, often as a broker, when I have to put my broker hat on and advise clients to think, if you buy cyber for nothing else, buy it for social engineering fraud. It's a great coverage. It's the one you're most likely to use out of almost all of your insurance. You buy insurance for slips and falls in your office. They don't happen very often. Social engineering fraud happens so often, it's quite surprising. So it's coverage, Greg, close your ears, it's coverage you should get from a cyber insurer.
Yeah, I'm dealing with one that's a $1.4 million loss. It was a house, so a law firm, real estate transaction, money went out of escrow. And callback procedure wasn't initiated because the lawyers, the clerk who initiated the escrow transfer, the partner's email was spoofed and they just went out. And so 1.4 million gone. The biggest one that we've seen to date, just not, I know we're running up on time. The biggest one that we've seen to date, and this is where AI and the generative AI is going to play in a big way, and why we're going to get to that last point being so important. There was a CFO of a bank in Hong Kong that was deep faked like the CFO was deep faked and initiated a transfer for $25 million, and the CFO paid it out. And so the bank lost 25 million on being duped by a deep fake.
Yeah, so the phone callback procedure is becoming even harder to believe because it's possible to dupe that as well, which is why the general advice is if you get changes in transactions, that's why it's so important to know your clients, know their voices, know who they are, is to call them back on the known good number and say, hey, did you really meet to send this? So yeah, it's one of the key things. So how do you protect your firm and your clients? Snazzy color coding, Roy G. Biv. I had to tap into my elementary school color coding here. But just to run through these guys and where they sit on that same map, which we'll do on the next slide. Multi-factor authentication, I think, Greg, you'd probably agree, is the single most important protection for any of those systems that sit outside of your system, and including the control of the ones inside your system. It's essentially the internet's way of determining you are who you say you are.
Yeah.
When you're at your desk in the office on a desktop that never leaves, you are who you say you are because you're sitting there, which is why you don't have to do multi-factor authentication all the time. But when you log into a system outside of your office, multi-factor authentication says, hey, if I ping your phone a number, I know you own that phone, so I can confirm you are who you say you are.
I'm letting you onto the network.
And then I'll trust you only once you've done that. So it's so important we have that everywhere. And thankfully that's becoming ubiquitous across pretty much every vendor you deal with, the phone company, everything. But that is top of the pops in terms of security. Patches, in no particular order after this, patches. Every 2 weeks or every week, even, or whenever they come out, those critical patches, because the criminals are finding new and inventive ways. Just like I mentioned on that OneDrive, I know it's SharePoint vulnerability, they're finding new ways to do it. So when those critical patches come out, and you can set these things to be automatic on your laptops, talk to your IT provider about making sure these are automatic on all your devices. So critical patches.
And if you do that, don't forget to shut down your computer every so often. Don't just close the laptop, but when you shut down, it'll push the updates through.
Okay. Virtual private networking for remote connections. This became so important during COVID. A VPN that has MFA on it, multi-factor authentication, is doubling up on those things to prove who you are to connect inside the office. A VPN, essentially a tunnel that goes through the internet, pops up in your office and makes it feel like you're right there sitting at your desk. So VPN is so important that it's secured with MFA. Testing, regular testing of backups. In the ransomware example we gave you, all the backups were there, but nobody tested to see if they could get access to them. So every so often, I think the minimum requirement under the coverage we'll talk about later is once a year. Great to do it every month. Just try and recover a file every once in a while, just to see if it works. The other thing that we discovered, I'll talk about it later. So I'm spoiling my points for later. Encryption of remote devices if they get lost. We had a great claim. It's one of my favorite claims from early days of the CLIA mandatory cyber program or Law Society provided cyber program. Somebody lost a BlackBerry. That tells you you're really hanging on to BlackBerry in 2017, you're still using it, but they lost their BlackBerry, lost device. This is a real claim. It was not encrypted, could have been a major exposure. Thankfully, they found it in the cushions of their car. So all good. We found it, but stress. So encryption of that device, all new modern phones, if you have a passcode, they're encrypted. iPhones come that way by default. I know it can be a pain in the butt when you want to let your kid play with your phone. I know that from being a parent. But yeah, having that passcode is so critical.
The other thing is if you're running Outlook and you're on your phone, the facial scanning recognition when you open your Outlook app, that's two-factor. That's full encryption if you can't get through to it. So it's layering in. To Ryan's point, as long as you're not touching your phone and having it open, there's factory level encryption on Android, iOS, everything. So it's
And the great thing is if you have laptops, Microsoft's
yeah.
Windows 11 Pro has it for free called BitLocker.
Yeah.
Typically it's on by default if you're hooking onto a network, but it doesn't cost you anything. It's just a matter of setting it up.
Yeah.
Endpoint detection and response. This is essentially the new version of antivirus. It used to be just a file gets downloaded, your family member sends you a funny video, it checks to see if that file is a known bad file, and then it'll flag it and quarantine it. That's old school. New school is we're looking at those things, but we're also looking at processes in behind the scenes that are running. And if they have a malicious signature, this system will, and the response part is absolutely critical, shut it down. It will just stop it before it can go anywhere. We have a system called Sentinel One, which Greg recommended to me years ago.
Yep.
And I've seen it work very effectively. You never know when somebody's going to click on the wrong thing. File comes in and they can no longer access anything. Their internet is cut off and their system is essentially locked out until they go through a scan and clean procedure, and then they can get back on the network.
Which sounds very complicated, but it takes less than 5 minutes. So it's very, very quick. The quarantining and identification and moving on takes no time at all. And the other thing that we saw in the early days was that new technology when it was new, it hadn't been democratized. So like small and micro businesses were having a difficult time because you would have to buy a set number of licenses to in order to, so your cost per unit, if you weren't using some of the units, would escalate, right? Now it's gotten to the point where there's some great tools out there that IT companies can distribute, and you can capitalize on economies of scale with it. And so that it's now accessible for firms of all sizes. It's not just for the big Fortune 100 companies anymore.
This is my sleep at night. I sleep so much better at night knowing this exists. Filtering of malicious content happens in a couple different places, but especially on email.
Yeah.
If you see the header that says, oh, this is an external email address, or this might be slightly suspicious, that's what we're talking about. Lots of great tools to do that.
Free ones built into Microsoft Outlook or right into your Gmail if you're running it. So
it's not a cost item, right?
No, it's
a matter of
bigger.
Annual training for cybersecurity and phishing simulations. We got a fake phishing thing going on at work. You can set it up for your staff. It doesn't really work if you're by yourself, but if you've got staff. You're tricky, Ryan. I see what you did there. But they're running this and it works. It works very, very well for training staff. And then when it prompts, it tells you, gotcha. And it says you have to do a quick couple minutes of training to refresh your memory. It's just good for keeping people on their toes. At my firm, we do something called Fish of the Day. PH. So fish of the day, PHISH, sorry. Fish of the day is when we get one that's a legit fish, we will copy and paste a picture of it, not the actual email, and send it around and highlight. It becomes a game. Everybody talks about how funny this one is because this mistake or that mistake. So we've gamified phishing. But the cyber training piece, any hour you can spend like this one, hour and a half you can spend like this one will get you there in terms of refreshing your memory. So kudos, you can check your box off. I've done that this year. Next slide. So how does this distribute out over the system, over the whole map that we developed before? Greg, you have to click the button a whole bunch of times. So MFA, most important, it can go all sorts of places, but most important on your email and at your bank access, make sure you have that multi-factor authentication there. Next slide. Patches everywhere, but critically make sure your firewall and your router and your applications, if you've got BC Law, for example, make sure that's patched the latest version, but also your Windows endpoints and so on, since it's not all inclusive. Next slide. Virtual private networking for laptops trying to access the office remotely, absolutely important, and it should have MFA on top of it. Next slide. Testing those backups. Going to keep drilling that one, because if you do get a ransomware, that is your get out of jail free card.
It's your last line.
It's absolutely imperative that your backups are tested and work. Next slide. Encryption, wherever you can use it, but predominantly phones, which is, as we mentioned, free and usually by default. But if you've got a BlackBerry, could be that you don't have it. Your laptops, anything that can leave the office and wander around, but also your backups, because the backups will become a target for criminals. And if they can get in and read your backups or just disrupt them and delete them, it's important that those backups are segregated and separate from your regular network and encrypted. Next slide. Endpoint detection and response on those endpoints should also be here as well, but on servers. So it should be on your laptops, but your endpoints there, your servers, anywhere you can put it, anything that runs essentially Windows should have that on it. Next slide.
Got it already. Sorry.
Oh, what, the filtering?
I was preemptive.
That's sneaky, that one.
Yeah.
Filtering is in two places on your email, making sure that you can see those scammy looking emails that don't even hit your inbox, but also on your firewall. Typically that's on by default, but there are more effective versions of firewalls that you can upgrade to that will filter bad content, not let staff go to certain websites if they look fishy. Next slide. And then training on staff everywhere, as regularly as possible, especially that phishing training and simulation. Claims process, we're really going to roll fast now, because we've got all the cool stuff, but now it's all the boring claim stuff.
The insurance stuff.
Yeah. So if you have an event, you'll identify you've had a breach by one way or another, something looks out of place, you're going to want to report a claim. I say that because you already have coverage for the Law Society, so use it. When you report a claim, as per the instructions down here, you'll almost automatically be connected with a breach counsel, external breach counsel. Norton Rose is our go-to.
Norton Rose is the default, so that number.
If it's a nothing burger, as Greg says, then it won't cost you anything. They'll do some of the intake stuff free of cost for the first 30 minutes or so.
Yeah.
But if it's a real deal, then you're already engaged with them. They're going to be your quarterback for the claim if it's a real thing. They will help you engage forensics with that.
It's a tripartite agreement, so that anything that is discovered, that you wouldn't want to get out, is under privilege.
So they'll get you a couple different quotes if that's what it's to be, or if there's a clear winner on who would do the best job for this particular case. They'll connect you with the right forensics through our insurer Ridge, who has pre-negotiated rates, which are much, much lower.
Yeah.
I want to point out the value of this, because if you wanted to go get retainers for these services separately, they would cost you a fair bit of money. You probably end up paying more per hour than you will through the insurance program. So it saves you money in two different ways. One, you don't have to have the retainer, and two, the rates are probably better than what you'd be able to negotiate yourself anyways.
So to give a quick example, very quick, we've seen, in the US, breach coaching rates, non-insurance based, are up to $1,500-$1,600 US an hour, coming out of New York. Even in Toronto and Calgary and Vancouver, some of those senior partner rates are over $1,000 an hour now. We are not that. We're about 40% less than that. And we've got experts that come in and support the senior partners on an associate basis. But the forensic side, those costs per hours have gone up and down. There's some that if you don't have a minimum of 600 hours of remediation, they are between $700 and $800 US an hour. So when you think about having 4 people on a team, you're really running through some of these 2 to 4 people on a team helping get you out of the muck. It can get very expensive very quickly. So that's why accessing some of, as Ryan mentioned before, the fixed cost business email stuff, as well as the preferred rates through the preferred vendors can be very, very beneficial.
It's one of the reasons why insurance, especially cyber insurance, is something that gives you value right up front. It's the bat signal. You can just call one number and get things rolling, and it takes that off of your plate so you can focus on working on, managing client communication, etc. Ransom payment if necessary, and any legal advice around disclosures and tracking. Get credit monitoring for clients if their banking information is up, all that stuff included in most insurance policies, including a law society policy. And then clean up restoration and then apply any learnings, try and fix things up, because it's not uninsurable just because you had a claim, but they're going to give you recommendations on things you have to do. Next slide. Now you'll be upset, but it's probably only 3 slides left, so prepare yourself for the abrupt end. So the Law Society provided coverage gives you up to $100,000 of first party loss coverage. Key thing is here, you already have it, so we just want to make sure that there's nothing new to buy here. It's already included. So key thing is the next slide, which tells you how to make sure it stays in place. Has $100,000 of first party coverage. Missing is the social engineering fraud, but you have the business income loss. So if you're out for a couple of weeks and you're losing business income, it can recover some of that. Event management expenses, all the forensics, the legal costs.
Not a narrow definition of securities law, yeah.
Yeah, it's just the.
For the folks online, please make sure to mute yourselves.
And
Folks
then
not on mute.
Careful with the 14101, only if it's gonna capture exchange requirements, right?
They're not listed.
Okay, then. Yeah, I don't think it would.
They're not a reporting issue, I should say.
I don't think it would undermine their securities authorization. They're just in contravention of the act.
if we listen long enough, it will be a data breach. So 250,000 is for the first part, the third party liability. Like we said, we haven't seen that triggered yet today. But that's consistent with other Law Society programs. It is subject to a $5,000 deductible, and for the whole Law Society of Northwest Territories, it's $1 million aggregate. So we haven't come anywhere near that on any of the programs by territory or province. But nevertheless, that's what makes it actually affordable. So that's why there's an aggregate there. Next slide. So these are the things that have color coded it because I got really wacky with the highlighter here. But essentially, these are the things that must be in place. And there's a really key thing here is conditions precedent. You don't have to fill in an application. The assumption is you'll have these controls. And really, your claim would only be denied if lack of this control is what gave rise to the claim. So just because you don't have a backup testing procedure, if backups have nothing to do with the loss, that's not going to cause you to not be covered. So it's quite liberal. And Greg, have we ever denied any claims based on this?
We have never denied a claim and we have accepted all notices. We've had 2 where it wound up being social engineering fraud, which and the standalone coverage wasn't purchased.
It just isn't covered.
In 7 years.
So this is mission critical to make sure you have this in place to make sure you can access your coverage and not have a denial. But as mentioned, most people are doing most of these things. So it's not to be, not too punitive. And you've done your training already. So nailed it. Next slide. So the conclusion, and I'm really stealing Greg's line here, as with cyber security, when being chased by a bear, you don't have to be the fastest, you just can't be the slowest. This is putting the club on your steering wheel. This is just making your car a little less appealing to thieves. Do the things that you can do. You don't have to be the top of everything. You just have to do, sort of the standard things which are being laid out here. The only bonus add-on would be, great passwords and a password manager, which we didn't talk about, but it's not on the list of requirements. So. I think is there one more slide? It's just that there's a cheat sheet that we're going to share with you. Greg put together that has some of the tools and easy ways to implement some of the things, and also a description about why insurers require those things. So we'll send that out in PDF so you can click the links and get access to that stuff. Whew. Finally, thank you for sticking it out. An hour and 10 minutes. It's a long presentation on cyber insurance.
Thank you so much.
At lunch.
Yeah. This is great on the cheat sheet.
Yeah. Problem. Any questions from the in-person crowd or?
I don't know I think everybody's on mute. There's the chat.
Yeah, if anybody has a question online, throw it in the chat.
Nope. Nothing so far.
Okay.
Awesome.
So we distribute the slides after the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm fearful. I always get so scared after every video.
Right?
What did I not do?
Exactly. What should we be doing? What should we care about?
Is it in, quick question from the Law Society crew here, is it a requirement to be technologically proficient?
In the code of conduct,
Code of conduct?
absolutely.
So that one's been making its rounds, so it's one of those things where this stuff kind of falls into that be technologically proficient piece.
Yeah, and then
Interesting. Sometimes being too technologically proficient leads you to make.
To not sleep.
No, to like have errors, like the more technology you use, if you're using AI.
Yeah.
If you're using like 4 different types of software, there is a greater risk to you because you're using more things.
For sure. And one quick piece of risk management advice on the AI side, if you're not paying for it, you are the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like when Copilot first came out, I still haven't enabled Copilot on any of our systems for our underwriters yet. We're going to develop an AI use policy first and then turn it on. But I've read through the privacy agreements. I'm not a lawyer. My wife is, and both of us have tried to figure this out. Going through the privacy agreements for Microsoft with all of your stuff, it all leads back to the Edge browser's privacy agreement.
Oh.
And so, is that going to be strong enough to, and it routes you 4 different ways before you get back to it. So it's a challenge at the best of times. And I don't want anything that's in our SharePoint or our OneDrive potentially being fed into Microsoft, into the machine that is Microsoft, and potentially even crossing the border. But, there's a whole lot of AI-based considerations that need to be given. But yeah, first things first, if you're using a free product, never put anything client-based into it, and don't put anything that you like identifiable within your firm into it either. But they're really useful tools. Like they're very, very slick, and it's crazy how quickly it's advancing.
Yeah. It's kind of scary.
I'm an Excel girl. It's all on Excel.
Yeah. I love Excel.
We're like pretty avid ChatGPT users at the Law Society. And so I always remind that, like, if you do not put it on the website, do not put it in ChatGPT. Don't. That's
Game changer for translation service though. Man, that's fantastic.
a starting point for some things.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you said about fax machines. CIBC and Robank will only communicate by fax.
Yeah.
I have a real estate practice and I had to get special permission from a manager to
go
get
by
something
email.
emailed to me because the fax wasn't working.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So, like it's against our
Like
policy
that
to
also?
email. So. So.
Was
It still exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yes, the court's like that too, right?
Did you come for your own?
Fax, they want to use fax over email.
Should we, nobody said anything in the chat?
Just thanks you.
Yeah, that's mostly because they don't have mechanisms under teaching.
Amazing.
Guess we can end it.
Have fax.
Should we stop the share? Is that okay, Jessica?
Shared inbox.
We just had a lawyer come up that heard there was Subway and she came for Subway.
Ah.
And I just need to point her out. I'm like,